Yes.
Could you, with a very brief example, review the concept of the lowest cost avoider?
The cheapest cost avoider.
Cheapest cost avoider. Just in very brief, to get it more clear.
Yes. Assume that in a contract you have a particular risk. And the expected value of the risk, that is the probability of a damage multiplied with the level of the damage in case of a damage, that this is 100, right? Now, and assume now that this risk can be abated by incurring costs, either by the buyer or by the seller. And assume that the seller can abate the cost by 10 and the buyer by 20. Then the cheapest cost avoider is the seller, because he has only 10. And therefore, if he incurs the 10, then within the whole setting of the contract, that will reduce the cost by 100, so you have a net gain of 90, right? But if the buyer would do the same thing, then the result would only be a net gain of 80 and not of 90, because you have here a cost incurred of 20. Is that clear? You know, we had perhaps I can illustrate. I don't know, but I think to illustrate this, I give you a case which also the Hamburg court had to decide, and it also again decided on the cheapest cost avoider principle without saying this. You know, we had a company in Hamburg which produces motors, small motors, I think for, I don't know, I think not for cars, but also motors. And for the motors, they are made out of blocks of steel. You know, the steel, and then at the end of the day it becomes a motor. And so they order these blocks, quadratic blocks of steel, and then they make motors out of it. Now, one day what happened was that a worker wanted to carry out one steel block, you know, in the factory, in the magazine, and it fell down, and it broke into pieces, broke into 3 pieces. For high quality steel, this should not happen, of course. So then they checked, and they found that that the steel was of low quality, this particular steel, and it had what can happen. It can always happen with steel, that it has so-called lancas in the steel, that is tiny small bubbles of air bubbles. So, and if you have thousands and thousands of bubbles, then the steel, if it falls down, it breaks. So then they checked the whole load which they had there, and they saw that I think I don't know, hundreds of such blocks had these lancas, and they were just scrap value. So they went to court. They wanted now from the company which delivered the steel, they wanted compensation for that. Now the legal problem here was this, that this was a transaction between merchants, right? A transaction between merchants, And in a merchant transaction in my country, if the good is delivered, then the buyer must immediately search whether the good is okay. So if he does not immediately do that and then give notice to the seller, he loses all rights. Pardon? It's not like in a consumer contract. And there is only one exception if the fault is hidden. If it is a hidden fault, right? So the producer of the steel says, you have not given any notice. We delivered this already 6 months ago, and you know that you don't have any rights anymore. And the company said, we could not see that. We did this with our methods, but these bubbles in the steel we could not see. It was a hidden fault. And now this came to the court. So the judge then asked, look, what can one do to detect this? And the company said, well, this can be detected by X-rays. By, if you put every block behind an X-ray screen, then you can see the bubbles. And then they said, well, you see, if every company to which you deliver this should buy an X-ray machine, that is much more costly than if the seller uses one X-ray machine and controls all the blocks. And therefore, you have the lower cost of making the control. And because you have the lower cost of making the control, we regard this as a hidden fault, which the buyer could not see. Not because he could not see it at all. He could have bought an X-ray machine, of course, but he has the higher cost to do that. And therefore, the seller had to replace the steel by good quality. That is how the cheapest cost avoider principle works, actually works. See? Okay. Yeah. So who's first?
So, sir, there are unspecified risks in a contract because there are certain possibilities which can't be foreseen beforehand by the parties. So, sir, in such situations, if the parties, after a dispute has arisen, try to formulate their arguments in such a manner that they both try to mimic the fully specified contract.
That they both
try to mimic the fully specified contract. Then how does it really work? Because every argument could swing either way. For example, if the Iran case that we noticed, the Iran-Germany case that you told us about. So, because of the change in law in one country, now the solution that the court arrived at could have swung either way because of the lack of any consensus by the parties. So isn't this very situational? I mean, what I'm trying to ask is, what is the consistency of fully specified contract? Because once a situation arises, then the moods of the party also change. Like what they would have arrived at before a dispute is very different from what they really want after a dispute. So doesn't it keep on changing? And if we even imagine the fully specified contract to be a thought experiment, then also it's not a very solid solution for the courts to apply. Because, as I said, it can swing either way.
Yeah, well, of course, sometimes you have not the information to know this, what the cheapest cost avoider, who the cheapest cost avoider is. That is clear. I don't deny this, but in many cases you have. I mean, I don't say that this always works, and but usually, I think more often than one believes it can work, I think. So it is not just that you rationalize afterwards who is the cheapest cost avoider, but it is, I think, a very powerful concept, even though it is, of course, not 100% reliable.
parties beforehand. So every dispute that we studied in those examples seems so remote. So for example, the loss that occurred in Japan in the jelly bean case. So this was due to some Japanese authority. Then how could any party be attributed any responsibility because of the defective product in the future?
No, well, in the Japan case, the problem arose only because the importer had stored these goods in the airport for weeks before he wanted to sell them in Japanese stores, you know, and then they had just been reduced to jelly mass, you know, because the color was good for eating, but it was not good for preserving the jelly bears. So, and then the cheapest cost avoider principle applies, or is at least reasonable here, because it is not, you know, you can argue that buyer, the company which produces the colors, cannot know this. They should have told them that this is for a particular production in a tropical region or whatever, and that it's not like in Germany, and that they should make clear that it should make that it is that is very important that the colors have also these structure preserving features.
So in the Jacob versus Young case, we say, so the critics say that specific performance should have been granted. So what I want to ask is that even though it was very costly to grant specific performance, but if it had been granted once, then doesn't that act as a deterrent for the others in the long run? So next time this kind of a case wouldn't occur. So if any construction company like Young or so anybody who's on that side would not do that. If it is not available, the reading manufacturer was not available, they would first speak to the other agent and come to a conclusion before making its own decision. So I think in the long run it could act as a deterrent. Whereas damages would then in fact motivate them to do such kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you know, my own feeling about specific performance and damage compensation is also, you know, I'm undecided there. But, you know, the problem here, the problem which you have is you put by specific performance. The upside of specific performance is, of course, always that if a contract is to be terminated, it can only be terminated by a voluntary decision, by a voluntary transaction. And then if you have you know, if you have the seller, the first buyer and the second buyer, then if the seller makes a contract with the first buyer and the second buyer has such a high interest in this product, then specific performance guarantees that the contract is only terminated if it is a Pareto improvement, if all these three are better off. Otherwise it would not occur. The second buyer is of course better off because he gets the good which he wants. The seller gets a higher price, or the producer, and the first buyer is better off, it's guaranteed that he's better off than with the contract because he does not get a damage compensation but a price, and he has his own reserve price, and if the price is lower than his reserve price, he will not agree to this. So the big advantage of specific performance as a breach remedy is that if it leads to a change of contract, it is always guaranteed that it is an improvement, that everybody is better off, a Pareto improvement. And damage compensation cannot guarantee this because damages are damage payments are often lower than the damages, so it is not guaranteed. On the other hand, and this makes me ambivalent with regard to this problem, you have often in these situations very serious hold-up problems, which give rise to a misuse of this position, this veto position. And then the argument of Calabresi with, property rule versus liability rule, that the same argument applies. See what I mean? So I cannot come up with a very clear solution, but I think that in general, it is the more pronounced these problems of the more pronounced these hold-up problems are, the hold-up problems, the more the more rational it is to have simply a damage compensation rule.
I don't mean that we should have a general system for all the cases.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to say is that in this particular case, they had already mentioned in the contract that the bedding manufacturer's copper pipes should be used. Even then, he had if he could procure them, he decided on his own. So in such kind of cases where it was specifically mentioned in the contract, even then he could breach the contract because he found it convenient. So in such kind of cases, if specific performance is imposed, then it will act as a deterrent for others who would think before taking such a decision.
Yeah, that is true, but I agree. On the other hand, put yourself in the role of the construction firm, right? So the construction firm made a contract, made a price, and 99 out of 100 customers would accept this because he did not use, let's say, lead or some inferior quality. He used copper of the highest quality. And in the courtroom, there were witnesses. They asked witnesses, and the expert witnesses said, this copper is of the same quality as Reading manufacture. So, but it is right. This person had a high sentimental reason for installing Reading manufacture. But the problem I have here with your argument is that this decision, if he had sticked to the contract, then he assumed the worst case, he would have perhaps waited for 4 weeks or so before he could take up work again, and the costs would have gone up considerably. And if that is the general rule that you do that, as a manager you say, we have here a bottleneck in our production process, and here we have this product, but we can replace it by almost by the same quality product. And if you then always say, I cannot do this, I must later on, I have huge costs and so on, this increases the whole cost of construction. Also for the 99% who give nothing for Reading manufacture in comparison to to other pipes. You know, that is the problem, I see.
I don't stand by my statement then, because if 99% would accept, then it would just be a matter of revealing that it is not available and I am going to use the other one. Is it okay for you? And 99% would agree. So taking that chance, so there would be a slight transaction cost in just disclosing it to the other party,
Yeah.
which he can increase in the contract price itself. And so that for that 1%, at least you would be sure. So, and maybe that other agent whose sentiments are so strong would be ready to pay the higher cost of the dealing because it is so important to him. So for the rest 99%, it's not costly at all.
Yeah, that is clear. If you can make a fully specified contract, then there is no problem at all. But that was not done here, because they both agreed that it should be ready manufacture, right? But they did not agree on what happens if it is not available. You know, or if it is available, but it takes 4 weeks, yeah. So just one more. I mean, I would had a totally different look at this case if they had used other products just for the sake of saving money, let's say, or so. But that was not the case. The thing was at the time not available, and then, you know, it would have delayed the whole construction. So please.
So in the Mercedes-Benz case, sir, after the incident has happened, they have made their court product. So what can the court or the law ensure that this case don't happen in future? How the law or court can ensure that? So because it was economically not efficient, so the court must ensure something to ensure that this doesn't happen in future. So what are the possible ways?
Yeah, that I don't think that can be excluded in the future. It we will always have such cases. So, pardon?
So then people can take wrong benefit out of it. So the business is not. How can this problem be solved? Either from legal side or from the company side.
Well, the question is whether this is the right decision whether that was the right decision to grant the buyer the right to specific performance, even though Mercedes would then have only produced one catalytic converter, one piece, you know.
So even the problem can arise in the case that other buyer may say that even blackmail, that either you provide me some compensation or let's say provide me this car for free, otherwise I will sue you in the court. So these problems can also arise.
Well, if Mercedes had delivered the car as it was in the contract, then there would be no problem. And usually that's what would have happened. The reason why this case could come up at all was only that between the contract formation and the delivery and even production, the European countries had agreed on a European catalytic converter, which had a standard which was higher than, let's say, Portugal or Greece originally wanted to concede, but it was lower than what Germany originally wanted to concede. And so they met somehow in the middle, and without this compromise, the whole case would have not come up. But such situation can arise in the future. You can not exclude them. They can always come up.
And so second thing was about the indication, signaling of good quality. So in that case, can we always say that if the warranty period is high, then the product is of good quality? So I mean, there can be a case possible where the company is newly launched, so it doesn't have that much resources to set up an institution like service centers or other things to give that quality.
Well, you know, you cannot always rely, and I can tell you a story from my own city, Hamburg, where somebody opportunistically exploited this. There was a merchant in Hamburg who imported electronic products from China. And of course, the electronic products from China are not as good, let's say, as Bang and Olufsen, and so, you know, these these high-end quality products from Denmark or from also from partly from Germany. But they are bought only by people, you know, who spend a lot of money for having the best possible product. So most people buy, for instance, TVs from Chinese production and so on. So, and he sold these Chinese products, and it went very well. And then he did something which he should not have done. He said, I sell the Chinese products and give a warranty of 3 years, just like this high-end product. The high-end products gave a warranty of 3 years, and these, you know, let's say, other quality from China, which is not bad, but it's also very cheap, he gave a warranty of also of 3 years. But of course, these products, they broke down much more often and so on. So after half a year, after 1 year, he had then huge costs of repair, which ate up all his profits. So that is exactly what happened. But the problem was then he filed for bankruptcy, and all the consumers, all the buyers got nothing, you know. So they had bought the products on the promise that they would be protected for 3 years, but then after 2 years, this guy disappeared from the market and was bankrupt. That is what we call, or what Oliver Williamson has called, the hit and run strategy. You know, you enter the market quickly, make a lot of profit with opportunistic behavior, and then disappear from the market. So you cannot always rely on that.
If the product is of high-end quality, but they don't have so much resources to let it flow, because they also have to maintain price competency. For example, a company is producing 10,000 items at some quality 10-50%. The other company is producing 100 items of the same quality, but obviously they will cost more. So they can't provide more cost because they have to be competitive in the market. So in that case, they don't provide these type of warranties, but still they are high-end products. So how they can ensure that they show the consumers their quality, that they are also high-end, but because they are small, they can't give the warranties.
Why can't they give the warranties?
So because they have just started out, they are the small company. They are producing 1,000 items, and the big ones are producing 10,000 items.
Yeah, but if they are good quality, then they have also a very low cost in giving the warranty.
So it's as if they require some institutions like service centers or other things.
Also, but one more thing can be done. Means like since the newer form, infant form, knows that my quality is good, he can outsource his warranty part. Let's say the big firms which he has a service center throughout the area. So he can collaborate with them. Okay, so service center, you can use my service center. You can pay some charges, as some other company does.
Yeah.
When the banking services does, like ING Vasya does, that he does not open his ATM center, but he collaborated with other banks, 4-5 banks, that their consumers can use their ATM without paying any charges. So these are some marketing strategy which even the infant firms can apply.
Yeah, very good example. I see. Yeah, of course. I mean, for every start-up enterprise, the beginning is difficult. I don't deny this. This is a general problem, but I think still that if a start-up company, which starts today and wants to establish it not on the mass market but on the high-end market, it should use, whatever it costs and how difficult it is, from the very first moment, this strategy of signaling, credibly signaling the high quality. So don't save money at the wrong end, so to speak. Yes.
So when you give the example of the car insurance, I mean the test drive and people
Yeah.
et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah.
So the car seller was the cheapest insurance, right? So can we apply the same logic to a glassware shop where everything is made of glass? So usually we see notices like broken will be considered sold kind of thing.
Yeah.
So can we also take it in that aspect that the shop owner or the company owner is the cheapest insurer of his stuff?
Yeah, I see no reason why it should not be.
So that means it would be efficient to not charge the consumers.
Yeah, the consumers are charged anyway. That you cannot, the consumers always pay the price for that because the consumers, so if you define a cheapest insurer, then of course his costs become part of the product price. What the consumer, the gain for the consumer is only if you put the cost on the cheapest, always on the cheapest cost avoider or on the cheapest insurer, that then overall, the overall cost for the consumer are lowest. But you cannot avoid that a consumer pays at the end of the day the full price for all the services he gets.
Yes, that is there, but that would be spread across all consumers. But if this thing is not in place, then if I happen to mishandle that something and it breaks down, then I will have to pay the entire price of that product. But
Yes,
in that
yes.
case, that won't happen.
Well, if if you mishandle the product, then this is not covered by a warranty contract, not at all. You know, that sometimes the insurance, sometimes the sellers are, very generous. They don't look so exactly.
I'm asking in terms of economic efficiency. Is it
Yeah.
efficient that the consumer pays it to the shopkeeper, or would it be more efficient that he insures all his items and increases the price for all consumers? Which one would be more efficient?
Well, I think for such cases of mishandling, it is better the consumer himself insures himself and is not insured by the price. Because if he insures himself, then the insurance premium reflects his risk or her risk. But if it is in the price, then you have always the problem that the high-risk types are subsidized by the low-risk types. That is one of the problems of one of the, let's say, negative aspects of producer's liability, by the way.